At my dad's 70th birthday, in front of everyone, my mom raised her glass and called me a leech. She erased me from the family photo, gave my gift to my brother, said I was just here to help. I paid for everything, and still, I didn't belong. But I stayed, until I didn't. Do you want to know the one thing I said that ended her speech? The envelope was cream-colored, heavy paper. My name, well, a version of it, embossed in gold on the front. Victoria Hale, Event Liaison. I stared at it for a moment. Not daughter, not even just Victoria. I laughed. A short, quick sound that didn't come from joy. Maybe it was a typo. Maybe it was their way of being funny. Or maybe it wasn't a mistake at all. Still, I told myself it didn't matter. I tossed the envelope onto the kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of iced tea, the sweet kind they serve too warm down here. At least they included me, I whispered. That night, I pulled out a teal handkerchief from the drawer, soft, worn at the edges. I had embroidered my mother's initials on it years ago, before I learned she preferred gifts she could wear to church. I folded it and slipped it into my purse. It was a habit now, like checking if the door was locked twice. The invitation was for my father's 70th. A dinner at the Magnolia Court. Semi-formal, family first. "We're so proud," the card had said, though I doubted they meant me. I arrived an hour early. Not out of duty, out of strategy. Showing up first let me choose my spot, control the tone, catch my breath. The Magnolia Court hadn't changed much in the last decade. Dark wood, portraits of people who looked important a century ago. A young man in a vest met me at the door. "Vendor?" he asked, smiling politely. "You with the planner?" "No," I said. "I'm family." He blinked, nodded, and stepped aside. Inside, the head table was already set, minus one chair on the end. My name wasn't on any place card. I asked a passing server, who shrugged and said, "I can grab one from the back." He returned with a folding chair, a little wobbly. He set it beside the main table, next to a water pitcher and a door marked staff only. Every few minutes, someone would brush past with a tray or a trash bin. My siblings were already there. Thorne and his wife were laughing about something too loud, and Lorna was bent over her phone. No one turned when I walked in. I adjusted my chair, pulled my coat tighter around me, even though it wasn't cold. Maybe I became invisible the moment I stopped needing them, I thought. Guests began arriving. A cousin I hadn't seen since college waved from across the room. My mother, Opal, floated between tables, her smile practiced and perfect. When she reached me, she didn't hug me. She touched my arm lightly, like I was a client, not her child. "You look very efficient," she said. "I'm not here in a work capacity," I answered. "Oh, of course," she said quickly, eyes scanning the room for someone more important. Then louder, to a couple behind her. "This is Victoria. She helped so much with the planning." I smiled. Polite. Tense, like I always do when she erases me in front of people. No one introduced me as daughter. No one asked how I'd been. All credit for the event, venue, menu, playlist, went to Thorne and his wife. I didn't correct them. I just sat, let it all slide, until I saw my father across the room. He smiled at me, just a flicker, and for a moment, that was enough. Dinner started. The kitchen door opened and closed so many times I stopped counting. Each time, a breeze hit my legs. The scent of bleach and old onions followed. The server who brought my chair earlier walked past and paused. "Did they forget to assign you a seat?" he asked. I looked up, gave him a small smile. "They didn't forget," I said. "This is just where I belong." I pulled the teal handkerchief from my purse and laid it in my lap. My fingers ran along the stitching like it was braille. I could still remember the first time I gave it to my mother. She folded it neatly, said, "Well, it's thoughtful." That was all. I sat through appetizers and soup, my back to the room. Every once in a while, I'd turn to catch a glimpse of the people I used to call home. Then Opal tapped her glass. "Before we finish dinner," she announced, "let's take a family photo." Everyone stood. I stood too. She waved her hand lightly. "Just the immediate family, please." I stopped moving. The room didn't. People shifted. Someone pulled out a phone. A server fetched the photographer. I stood still, my arms at my sides, the handkerchief clenched in my palm like a surrender flag no one asked for. They started the gifts right after dinner, when the dessert plates were still half full and the wine had loosened the room just enough for fake sentiment to feel authentic. I waited. That's what you do when you know yours is last. You let the noise filter out first. Wine bottles, ties, a photo album with mostly pictures of Thorn and Lorna's kids, cards with Bible verses and half-hearted jokes. And then, finally, mine. I stepped up without a smile. I didn't need one. I handed my father a small box wrapped in deep navy, no ribbon, no theatrics, just weight. He opened it slowly, fingers stalling over the velvet edge before flipping it open. A vintage Bulova, gold trim, deep blue face, the same model he lost years ago when the house flooded. He once said that watch made him feel like time wasn't chasing him. His eyes welled, and for a second, it felt like only the two of us were in the room. "This is too much," he whispered. "You always deserved something beautiful," I said. He looked like he wanted to say something else, something meaningful, but he didn't get the chance, because that's when my mother leaned forward, laughing lightly as if she were swatting at a gnat, and said, "Thorn picked that one out, didn't he? Such excellent taste." I didn't speak. Thorn chuckled, all faux modesty. "Well, I gave a few ideas." There was a round of applause. Heads nodded, smiles spread. I just stood there, one hand still half extended, like maybe my name would finally catch up to the gift. But it didn't. I sat back down. My seat still cold, my plate still full. Later, as the buzz swirled around who gave Dad the best gift, I heard Opal tell 3 different guests it was Thorn's idea. Lorna added something about how he just knows Dad so well. One woman leaned over to her husband and said, "She's sweet, but Thorn's always been the heart of this family." How do you argue with that? Once a story starts being told by multiple mouths, it becomes fact, even when it's fiction. It wasn't the first time this happened. I remembered winning that statewide essay contest in 8th grade. I came home with a plaque, a photo, a check. And at dinner, my mother turned to my uncle and said, "Thorn could have done that if he tried. He's always been our natural speaker." I didn't eat much that night either. When the guests moved into smaller circles and the evening shifted into its soft decline, I caught Thorn near the bar. "Why didn't you say something?" I asked him, my voice calm. "You knew I picked it." He glanced at me, glass in hand. "It's just a watch, Vic. Why does it matter so much to you?" "Because it was mine to give, not yours to take." He snorted. "You're always so sensitive. You should be happy he liked it. That's what counts, right?" I didn't respond. There are conversations that end without needing to be declared over. I turned, started back toward my table. The noise in the room had softened into something less celebratory, more tired. Then I heard her. My mother. "She means well," she was saying to someone I didn't recognize. "But she's always kept score, even with love." I didn't stop walking. But my smile, whatever faint shape it had tried to form, folded into the fabric of my lap, right alongside the napkin. A week before the dinner, I got a call from Opal. "We need someone to help with the little things," she said, not quite asking. "You know how the caterers get flustered and Thorn is always too busy with his family." There wasn't a pause, just the sound of expectation. So I said yes. I showed up at the Magnolia Court 2 hours early. No one else in sight. I set up the place cards, aligned each candle, double-checked the name tags. I adjusted the floral arrangements so they wouldn't block anyone's view. It was quiet work. No one saw it happen, but everyone would notice if it hadn't. A young server passed by, smiled kindly, and said, "Do you do this for a living?" I smiled back. Apparently. That sentence lingered longer than it should have. Now, dessert was being served. The lights had dimmed just slightly, and the conversations turned from exaggerated to tired. Across from me sat Dale Kinney, a family friend who's known us since we were kids. He leaned forward, half drunk but not slurring yet. "Heard you're still living off your dad," he said, half laughing. "Must be nice not to have to work like the rest of us." I didn't blink, just kept my smile pinned and said, "I manage." But the words cut. Not because they were loud, but because they were said like gospel, like everyone already believed it. I turned my head slightly, caught Opal whispering something to Lorna. Their eyes flicked toward me, then away. When people decide your role, they don't need your permission to hand out the script. I pulled back from the room, mentally, not physically, just enough to see it all from the outside. Lorna's kids were playing near the wall, using their forks as swords. Bram was on his phone, scrolling like the building wasn't full of people he pretended to like. Thorn was telling a story to a group that didn't ask for it, laughing harder than the punchline deserved. They all looked like they belonged. Not because of what they did, but because they knew they'd always be considered the center. I did the planning, I thought. They did the performing. A memory surfaced. Years ago, when my cousin graduated, I helped set up his party. Picked up the cake, folded the chairs, tied the balloons. When the photographer came, I stepped to the side, just instinct. But one of the aunts told me gently, "Sweetheart, this photo is for the graduates." I wasn't one of them. I'm not sure I ever have been. Opal approached, wine glass in one hand, her smile locked in place. "You've always been so good at making things nice," she said. "That's your strength. Quiet usefulness." It wasn't meant as an insult, but it wasn't a compliment either. I nodded. I didn't trust myself to speak. Back at the table, I sat down and noticed my dessert was different. Everyone else had bourbon pecan tart, the one I'd specifically requested when arranging the menu. In front of me, a red velvet cupcake. I looked around. No one else had it. I didn't ask why. I already knew. Opal didn't like how the tart looked on camera. I ate nothing. Then the photographer, the same one from earlier, reappeared. "Let's do one more photo," he said. "A group one." Opal clapped her hands, stepping into motion like she'd been rehearsing it all week. "Just the core group," she called out, turning toward the crowd. "Let's make it quick." Everyone moved, so I stood, then stopped. Same dance, different song. I stepped just off to the side, behind a pillar, out of frame, and watched them pose without me. Opal tapped her glass like it was a microphone, not loud, just enough to hush the air. It worked. A room full of people who never listened knew exactly when to quiet down for her. "Let's do some toasts," she said, smiling like a woman who just remembered her manners. Thorn stood first. He always did. Told a story about Dad driving him to a middle school football tryout in a thunderstorm. The joke didn't land, but folks laughed anyway, probably more out of instinct than joy. Then Lorna stood, got teary within 10 seconds, thanked Dad for being her anchor, thanked Mom for being her mirror, hugged them both, full performance. She even dabbed her eyes with a linen napkin like it was choreographed. I waited. My note wasn't a speech, just a few lines, something real. When Lorna sat down, I stood. I didn't raise my voice. I barely raised my glass. And that's when Opal said, "Let's move to the cake. I think that's more important than more talking." Just like that. No shame. No pause. The crowd shifted. Someone clapped. Another laughed. I stood there for a breath longer than was polite, then lowered my glass and folded the note into my hand. No one said anything. A few sympathetic looks glanced across the table, but evaporated just as fast. Dad didn't even look up. He picked at the corner of his plate like he was trying to distract himself from choosing a side. I wasn't asking for a spotlight, just a little space. I slipped the note into my clutch without opening it, the same way you put back a sweater you love because you know it won't be worn. I'd written it the night before. Sat on my balcony with a bourbon and thought, maybe this is the night I stop being quiet. Turns out, the room wasn't interested. I remembered being 11 at church, singing during the holiday recital. My sisters hit every note wrong, but they got standing applause because they did it loud. I sang soft, in key, but Mom said later, your voice wasn't strong enough to lead. The servers began handing out dessert. I noticed instantly, bourbon pecan tart was gone. In its place, red velvet cupcakes with bright white frosting. Lorna's favorite. I asked nothing. No point. Opal leaned over and whispered, the tart was too rich. This is more photogenic. Even food isn't immune to her editing. I didn't eat. I didn't even reach for a fork. The noise in the room blurred like background static. I watched the table as if I weren't sitting at it. Lorna gestured big with her hands while laughing. Bram nodded without hearing. Thorne posed mid-sentence like he was born holding a wine glass. I realized then, maybe being excluded wasn't accidental. Maybe it was architectural. A design they agreed upon years ago. I opened my phone and deleted the note. My face stayed neutral, not stoic, not blank, just done. Opal stood again, same posture as before, and lifted her glass. A thank you to each of my children, she said. This night wouldn't have happened without you. She never looked in my direction. I didn't flinch. I folded the cloth napkin in my lap, neat, firm, like muscle memory. Same way I folded one when I was 12, back at Aunt Sylvia's, when no one saved me a seat, and Mom told me to just grab one from the extra table. That night, I folded the napkin 3 times, placed it square on the plate, and left without a word. Tonight, I folded it twice. The third fold would come later. They called for one last photo before the cake. One more chance to smile like everything was fine. The photographer, same as earlier, motioned toward the head of the room. Let's get the whole family again, now with the cake. Opal stood, already smoothing her blouse and pointing people into position. She knew exactly who went where. Lorna next to Dad, Thorne slightly behind, the grandkids arranged by height like ornaments. I stepped forward, reflex more than decision. Opal didn't even look my way, just waved her hand like she was shooing a gnat and said, "We've got it, honey. Maybe take one for us instead?" And that was that. No one looked confused. No one said, "Wait, where's Vic?" Not even Dad. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, handed it to the waiter who'd refilled my water earlier. "Would you mind?" I asked, voice even. He nodded politely. I stepped back, way back, out of frame. The flash went off, a perfectly lit lie. Later, as people began to wander off and the room eased into its goodbye phase, I found my father near the side wall, sipping from a lowball glass like it was medicine. "Can I ask you something?" I said. He didn't look surprised, just tired. "You didn't want me in the photo?" He didn't answer right away, just stared into his glass. Then finally, "Your mother thought it might be less complicated." I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I'd heard this one before. When I was 19, I won a departmental award at college. They gave it to me during a small ceremony on a Thursday night. Dad said he'd come. That afternoon he called, said he was too tired from work. The call lasted under 30 seconds, but it rewired something in me that's never fully healed. Tired was just a placeholder. The real reason, I think I wasn't the child he wanted to show off that night. Back in the present, I gave him a polite smile. Got it, I said. Then I stepped outside. The terrace overlooked a parking lot half full of sedans. The kind of view that matched how I felt. Functional, unmemorable. From inside, I heard laughter. My name surfaced once in a joke. I didn't bother to hear the punchline. I sat down on a bench against the stone wall and let the cold of the concrete settle in my spine. I used to believe they just forgot, I thought. Now I see it was chosen. Every exclusion, every dismissal. It wasn't oversight. It was orchestration. And I'd played along. I'd made the cakes, arranged the rides, paid the bills, told myself I was being generous. What I really was silent. I let them design a version of me that never made noise, never interrupted, never asked for credit. And then I got upset when they forgot I existed. But tonight I wasn't sad. I wasn't even heartbroken. I was angry. Quiet, clean anger. The kind that doesn't yell. It exits. I stood, brushed the wrinkles from my dress, and walked back inside. People were still lingering, wine glasses half full, stories half-truths. I sat at my spot. No one looked surprised to see me. This time, I wasn't trying to blend in. I was just being visible. For me. I reached into my purse and pulled out the teal handkerchief, the one I used to keep just in case someone needed comfort. I unfolded it and laid it on the table. Neat, centered. It was the only thing in the room I controlled. Someone began pouring wine for the final toast. The bottle hovered near my glass. I raised a hand. I'll pour my own. Lorna's youngest dropped her napkin under the table. I bent down to help before anyone else noticed. A quiet gesture, one I was used to making. As I handed it back, she tilted her head and asked, "Why doesn't Grandma like you? She said you were just here to help." My smile didn't falter. I didn't scold her. I didn't correct her. I just said, "That's a good question." Children don't make that stuff up. They hear it, they absorb it, then they repeat it like it's fact. I remembered being her age, maybe 6 or 7, overhearing my mother whisper to a friend at church, "She'll never be the charming one." I didn't know what charming meant back then, but I knew I didn't have it. Even the youngest are handed scripts. Some of us get lines, others just hold props. I walked to the bar for some water, and that's when I heard it. Thorne was leaning against the counter, chatting with Dale Kinney, that same family friend who'd made the "still living off your dad" comment earlier. Dale raised his glass and said, "Your mom's really generous. Must have cost a fortune to put all this together." Thorne didn't even hesitate. "Well, technically Vic paid for most of it, but Mom said we should keep it simple." They both laughed. I didn't. I stood behind a column, not hiding, just still. He knew I was there. Dale didn't. But Thorne did. He always knows. And he said it anyway. My stomach didn't drop. My hands didn't shake. That would have meant surprise. But I wasn't surprised. I was done. They know, I thought. They've always known. And they're okay with it, as long as the spotlight hits the right faces. I walked past Opal as she chatted with distant cousins, her tone sugary and her jewelry catching every bit of light. She didn't look at me, but she knew I was there. I could have stopped, said something, made a scene. Instead, I pulled out my phone and texted my assistant. "Send me the folder. 5 years of transfers, invoices, and receipts. Personal use only." Then I stood near the window, staring at my own reflection. "This is the woman they couldn't erase," I whispered to myself. So they tried to rename her. I didn't cry. I cataloged. I scrolled through old screenshots, bank transactions with my name, Airbnb confirmations, wire transfers labeled Family use. I renamed the folder. The debt they never paid. Not out of spite, just clarity. I needed to see the cost. If I kept letting them write my story, I'd vanish from it entirely, like I was never here, like I'd never paid for the roof, or the dinner, or the tuition, or the tires. I'd just be a helpful ghost. I wasn't going to haunt them anymore. As I walked back toward the table, I passed Lorna and Bram. She was mid-laugh, sipping something pink and fizzy. She says you're sensitive, but useful, Lorna giggled, not knowing I was within earshot. Like a sponge, soaks it all up, never complains. I stopped for just a second, looked straight ahead. Then I sat down, placed my phone face down on the linen, and exhaled. Tomorrow, I erase the balance. Dale suggested a final toast. Folks had started gathering their coats and bags, but his voice pulled them back. Let's raise one more for the man of the hour, he said, too loud and too late in the evening to sound sober. Opal stood first. Of course she did. She held her glass like it was a crown and smiled like she hadn't orchestrated half the hurt sitting around the table. I just want to say how proud I am of this family, she began. How strong we've been through everything. I heard murmurs of agreement, forks set down, half-hearted clinks of crystal. She kept going, voice syrupy sweet. Even when some people forget their place, we must remember who built this. And then, without looking at anyone else, she turned to me. You're a leech, Victoria. Always have been, always will be. Laughter vanished. Just like that, someone dropped a fork. It hit the table with a sound too sharp, too final. No one said a word. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I looked around the room slowly. Dad's eyes were wide, but he didn't move, didn't speak. Lorna glanced down at her lap like her dress had suddenly become fascinating. Thorne smirked, then looked away. That was the moment. Not the insult, not the silence. The realization. They were fine with it. This time, I wasn't going to let silence shield them. I stood. My chair didn't scrape. I'd pushed it back gently. I picked up my glass of wine, still full, untouched, clinked the side with my fork. A soft sound, enough. Everyone turned. Perfect, I said. Then don't ask me for any more money. Someone coughed. No one breathed. I didn't sit back down. The birthday dinner? Mine. The renovations on your roof, Mom? Mine. The hospital bill last year? Mine. I reached into my purse, took out a slim folder, placed it on the table in front of me, labeled Family Ledger. You called me a leech, I said. But I was the one feeding this family. Thorne tried to laugh, but it cracked midway. She always did keep receipts, he said, a weak attempt at humor. I turned to him. I keep them because you always forget the truth. Opal scoffed. It sounded rehearsed, but her hand shook slightly as she set her wine down. Dad opened his mouth to speak. I raised a hand. Not tonight, I said. You made your choice when you didn't stop her. I turned to each face around that table. One by one. Not in anger, not anymore, in clarity. This wasn't vengeance, it was release. I reached down, picked up my teal handkerchief, folded it slowly, firmly. The last fold. I stood tall. I walked toward the exit. And just before stepping out, I turned back to the room. This was your last meal at my expense, I said. Bon appetit. The room didn't move right away. After I said what I said, people just sat there, quiet, holding their drinks, holding their breath, unsure if they should stay or pretend they forgot their coats. Some leaned toward the door, but didn't take the step. The party was over, but the reckoning was just beginning. Opal tried to laugh. She's just having a moment, she said, forcing the corners of her mouth up, but I didn't sit down. I didn't raise my voice either. Moments pass. This one stays. I reached into my purse and pulled out the folder, The one I'd labeled in thick black ink, Family Ledger. I opened it without ceremony. No build-up, just the truth. I read aloud, $1,800 for Thorne's car note, April 2020. $3,200 for Lorna's dental surgery, July 2019. $14,000 for Dad's heart procedure, March 2018. Gasps weren't loud, but they were there. Shifts in chairs, tightened jaws. One guest actually looked away, like watching me read was suddenly inappropriate. Opal's voice cut in, sharp but lower now. This is unnecessary. I met her eyes. So was pretending I don't exist, but you've done that for years. I walked around the table, placing printed copies in front of each of them. Thorne, Lorna, Opal. Calvin got his last. No one reached for theirs. They looked at the papers like they were poisoned. This isn't about guilt, I said. It's about memory. Because you all seem to have short ones. I stood back at my chair, not behind it, just beside. Then I pulled out my phone, dialed the bank. Speaker on. Yes, I said clearly. I'd like to close the shared account ending in 4062, effective immediately. Pause. Yes, I understand. No remaining balance. Thank you. Click. I looked up. You're going to have to find a new emergency contact and a new emergency fund. Opal stood. Her voice trembled, more from rage than nerves. You're being petty. No, I said, steady. I'm being precise. That was when she went for one last hit. Tell them what you did during your father's hospital stay, she said, voice rising. How you left early to go to some networking event. How you said you had more important things than family. A few heads turned. One or two eyebrows lifted. It was bait. Classic Opal. And I didn't bite. Instead, I pressed play on a voicemail. Opal's voice filled the room. Don't make a scene at the hospital. You're not his priority right now. Stay out of the way. Silence again. The kind that shatters glass. I looked at Calvin. He looked at the floor. Finally, he said, I should have spoken sooner. I nodded. It's late, but at least it's true. Then I reached into my purse one last time, pulled out my credit card, snapped it in half, dropped it on the dessert table beside the untouched cake. This, I said, looking around, is paid in full. I turned toward the exit, and so am I. Coming home felt different this time. The silence wasn't heavy, it was earned. No noise waiting, no one to perform for. I closed the door behind me and dropped my purse onto the entry table. The teal handkerchief came out of it, same as always. I laid it gently on my dresser. This time, it didn't fold like surrender. The crease from the dinner still ran through the middle, a quiet scar. I let it stay. The voicemails stacked up quickly. Thorne's was loud, full of outrage. Lorna's was coated in fake confusion. I didn't even know you felt that way. Opal said nothing, not even a text. Dad left one message, just one. Can we talk? Silence isn't peace, it's space. But sometimes, space is where healing has room to grow. I sat on the couch, turned on my laptop, and opened the folder labeled Slideshow, Final Edit. The file was still there, untouched. I double-clicked it. The video played with no music, just ambient sound. My voice narrating softly. Clips of me and Dad, when I was 5, then 15, then last year. Him smiling on the porch, me bringing groceries, holding his arm as he walked out of the hospital. There were no fireworks in it, no spectacle, just still, real things. The final quote appeared over a black screen. Some people show love loudly. I showed mine in small, constant ways. I uploaded it to a private link and typed out a short email. This was supposed to play at the party, just in case you ever wonder. Then I clicked send. A week passed. He asked me to meet him at a cafe we used to go to when I was in college, the kind of place with mismatched mugs and strong drip coffee. He was already there when I arrived. He stood up like he wasn't sure if I'd let him hug me. I didn't offer. He sat back down. The apology didn't come with tears or dramatics, just stillness, and a sentence that didn't try to save face. "I should have told them to stop," he said. "I should have told you I was proud of you." I stirred my coffee, let the quiet do its part. "That moment passed," I told him, "but healing doesn't need applause." He nodded slowly, reached into his coat pocket and slid a small box across the table. Inside was a folded piece of paper. My drawing, first grade. A flower with crooked petals and a smiling stick figure version of me. He'd kept it in his wallet all these years. I looked at him. "The flower," he said, "looks like the one on that handkerchief." It was. I hadn't realized I'd embroidered the same one. We sat for a long time. "I'm not cutting the family off," I said after a while. "But I'm stepping out of the role they wrote for me." He didn't interrupt. No more invisible generosity. No more bankrolling bad behavior. If they want me in their lives, it needs to be real. He didn't promise anything, but he didn't argue. And that, right now, was enough. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing to remember with clarity instead of pain. Weeks passed. I started teaching again. Weekend workshops on money management for women starting over after divorce or loss. It gave me something steadier than obligation. Sunday mornings, I drank my coffee alone. No guilt, no waiting for calls that wouldn't come. My card was no longer on file. But my worth, it was. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the start of one that I wrote myself.